Hello. Thank you for being here with us to see the film and the discussions that will take place right after. I would like to thank the Forum of Peace and the Regional Council of Normandy to enable us to present the different films that the Docs Fund Association presents and supports. I represent it. These are films that concern themes linked to the defense of human rights. Docs Fund has been existing for 4 years now with the support of the Regional Council in Normandy, Forum for Peace, and we are able to develop to make these films, first of all, that are shown in most festivals around the world. They win prizes, but they rely on words that we do not often hear, which concern, of course, the main problems in our societies, global problems, and what we are adding, and to make a difference, because when it's about human rights, all these themes are important, and we would never imagine saying one is less important than another. No, the difference with these films is in the writing, the cinematographic writing, because it's with cinema that this word we are bringing to people is passed on and up to you. So I want to wish you a good projection, and we'll meet right after.
মোবাইল আসিল তো মোবাইলে আর মোবাইল গজে দেরি মোরাতে আসে দেরি হালবাই হালবাই
মানুষ মারি ফেলাই হাট ফিল্ডে তো আষ্টময় সময় দিন মানর হামিলার মাই দুজন মারি ফেলাই বেড়াই বেশি মাঝে পয়নে বেশি মাঝে তো মারা মাঝে ফতন মাঝে Sekottele javade edin reke edin bad tawade ere ondara dia motam paramade tarane nida shinne badara ar sekno gona ara bekum ma bekum ara swate agi
গলিয়ারে বাদে সাহায্য নেন্দে গরক গলি দে হই বাড়ি দে আলা আতি ফান্দে সান্দে নিলিয়ারে নিলি যাইতে চাই নিয়ে যাইতে চাই বেগুরুন সাদে দাংহুড়া রুজু হসিমিকা দরিয়ার হাঁচা রুজু জাত দি বাদে সাদে আইও ফিসতি দুমুরি দে হেড়ে আরে গুলি মারি আরে ফেরা দি ও তারা যায় ভাজি হরিদয়ানের বাবুতে তারা হাঁসন হাজঙ্গর গুলি গতি দেখি বাদে সাদে আর শুঁড়ি বান্ধে ফেলাই শুঁড়ি বান্ধে আরে এলা এজনে গজনে দুজনে গজে আল্লাহ দেখি হিয়া না বেসুতে গিয়ে এলা লো জার গুই ঠেম্বাই রে আয় হন কিছু করে ভাড়া আর হেদুর মাঝে তারা রে করে বাদে সাদে বাড়ি ভিতরে দাংহুড়া আসছিল দাংহুড়া দেখা মরে আরে বাদে এলা খুঁড়া দাংহুড়া দুয়া ফাড়া ফেলাই
ফারা দি ফলাই ফারা দি 30 জন পর্যন্ত গরম তোর গলি গিয়ে মিলিটারি তো গলি আর ইয়ার পরে হেঙ্গে যে তরবাড়া হড়ে হয়ে মাথার ফরগান আর ভাসি দি দুর্গ্রি ফেলাই দি বলে হদিন উলার বড় বাদ দি বাদ ফাদ দি দে তুন আমাদের মগ দিয়ে দে গায়ের ফারা দিয়ে আরে 30 জন পর্যন্ত গর গলি হদিন নাগরের মাথা মা ভাই হাসি দিয়ে দূর মাঝে ফেলাই দি ফলে শুরু মাঝে আর গার গরুর সিবিদ্দ যেতে রেপ গজে জনিয়ান হয়ে পারি দে আয়ার বীজ গরু যে চলা তাই আর খুনে হারি হজন গজে দিয়া তো বিশ তো মাঝে আর গা গোসল দোয়া বিলি বাংলাদেশের জায়গায় আনা তাই আরে কুতুপালং MSF ডাক্তারখানা হতে জায়গায় আনা তাই যাই আরে 2 মাস মাসিক বন্ধ আসি এটা যাই পরিষ্কারই যেদিন মানে লাগে ওইদিন বিয়ের ফেগার ঠিক লইর আগে গরম মাদু ফুয়াইন সিয়ানো আর ঘর মার মেটিলে গলে করে ওরা আজন আজ আমাজন আ দে দুয়া আর 4-5 জন আছি তা মগলে আর ঘর মা মগলে না দাকে তারা নেলা ফেলাই আ দে তারা নেলা বাদা সব দুমা বানি ফেলাই বাদে মারা শুধু জানি সোনা মারা কিছু সে দে রে না জামা দে রে জামার দড়ি বাদে মারের ভাষা কত জামার ভাষা মারের করে ভাষা কত রক্ত গিয়ে তাই সোনা মারা আর বেশ গোল ফেলাই যে তা বেশি কিছু চাইবে তো না মানে গলার ওদের কর মারি ফেলাই যে কিনারে তাই সোনা মার আর মার ফেলাবো বাদে কলা হয় দাম মারিবা বাদ ফারালে মানে সদা দিয়ে সোনা মারা মগা গুলি মারা শুধু যে तेरा मार हसन मदा आए गुरु सराते मरा आगलते तो एडो गुरु सराते अंदर गुरु फिर दिते कि तेरा मार हसन तो आर माको आर फाइनल होतो फाइनल लगा मरा ना फाइनल होतो पानी लगे मतलब आरा दो जना श्रम गुरु इन फिर दिते कि तीन फिर दिते जाए बात आरा माता ही ना जाए दो विदेश मौके वेल आरा दौरे वाला ही हुआ था आर को आरा तर हुआ था रे दौरे वाला ते तारा दौरे इधर कमर गलाएगा আর এটা আর কামার গলায় ফুক তো দুয়ার বেগুলো ফুক দিবালাই বাদা আর গোসে তো গোর গলায় বালাই দি তার এটা কিরকিরে তুনে দিকে কিরকিরি মেলি বাদ আফওয়ান আর হদন আছে দিনের হয়ে ইনে ডাবল বাজার মতো মগে বাত তো না দিয়ে তো না নদের ফোন দিয়ে বেশি দিয়ে ডাবল বাজার মতো না দিয়ে আর গজি দিন লা দুনিয়ার হাসে বিশেষা আর মগমারা ফরাদানা রাখে আর দুনিয়ার জানাই দে আর বেসারি সাইড আর মগমারি আর নিজে দঙ্গ দিয়ে আর বেসা সাইড দুনিয়ার বুঝাই দে আর মা বোনের নিজে দঙ্গ দিয়ে আর রোশন নিজে macam itu yang kan biasa bisa saja. Ara ini ara Rohingya kan dulu tu dan dina ara kamu sayo. Ara yang jalan mata ara la sabar mari kalau Rohingya kan bosan Rohingya kan itu ara kamu sayo. Ara ay hani kalau kesuna lagi dalam barang kesalahan lagi ara kan ay asli. Mana hani kalau kesuna lagi dalam.
Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone.
C'est tout à fait évident de reprendre la parole après
It is
ce
not
documentaire.
quite obvious to take the floor after watching this film. I'm the journalist, David, and I'm going to support you for a year and 15 minutes during the discussions with Olga Prudhomme-Farge, who directed this movie, and Mrs. Patel, representative of the United Nations for Sexual Violences in Conflicts. You must have seen her during the plenary session. But before giving them the floor, I just have a question. What about this situation? And before seeing the film or hearing about it by the teachers, had you heard about this topic? Do you want a reminder in terms of geography and history? So we'll give a class for a few seconds and let's do this together. Olga, I will give you the floor. We are at the border between Burma or Myanmar and Bangladesh. Since 1982, the Rohingya, a minority, a Muslim minority in a Buddhist country, Burma or Myanmar, have a specific status that excludes them. They could have survived as such for many years, but in 2012 and 2017, there was a genocide. Yes, I just want to go back to the world Muslim minority, because seen from where we are, we can easily think that it's a religious war, at least, to kick out Muslims from Myanmar, but in reality it's more complex. As proof of this, within the Rohingyas, not only Muslims, there are Hindus as well. So it's not just chasing away Muslims, that's not just that. We saw how the people in Burma or Myanmar treated their own populations in Myanmar in more or less the same way as they did with the Rohingyas. So what is certain is that Myanmar needed to get rid, well, we talk about an ethnic cleansing, but it means cleaning the region. It's a region that is north of Burma, in the northwest. Why? Because they discovered hydrocarbons there and fields of hydrocarbons in the harbor of Sittwe, which is the capital of Arakan, the region where these Rohingyas lived. This is on the one hand in order to exploit this gas, very simply, and also to build an oleoduct and bring oil from the Arabic Peninsula to China through this oleoduct that was put in place a few months after this crime against the Rohingyas. So almost all the Rohingya population had to flee to Bangladesh nearby and had to cross the border either through sea, they came on ships or boats, or through land, and they had to go through marshes and hills, and it was very brutal. The army came in, burned everything down, people fled, and as was said by the people who testified in the film. So, of course, religion was instrumentalized, but there are other levels, and beyond this religious issue, previously, as we saw, there is this geopolitical issue. We heard this morning that we couldn't say, but China needs hydrocarbons because it has none. And in order to get supplied in hydrocarbons, in this way, they can avoid going through the Malaga Strait, and it would take longer, and etc. So this is why they built this oleoduct, this pipeline. And there are roads, drug roads, main roads, because this is the main resource in Myanmar. Historically, they transited south through Laos, amongst other countries, and the bordering or neighboring countries. They had to find a new road, and therefore today all the drugs produced in Myanmar go through the Araka region. This is the route they take. The microphone? Oh, great. Okay. Thank you very much. So maybe I said too much, but this explains the brutality of these actions. Yes, thank you very much for having underlined how the words I used and clarifying things. If we give a few figures now, the camp in which you shot and collected these testimonies are more than 170 people. Yes, figures today. Today, 1 million refugees are in the camp. It's considered as the biggest camp in terms of populations in the world. It's the 1 million refugees live there. Do you know? I checked. It's 100,000, so 10 times the population. So 13 square kilometers. If you compare to Caen, to the city of Caen, 10,000 more people. So we realize how the importance of this population within the camps. So when you arrived as a filmmaker, it was to collect the testimonies. It wasn't to do that in the first place, but these women came to you. Yes, it's a question of serendipity. In fact, we look for something, and in fact, we find something else in the end. So I had come, indeed, a few months after the fleeing of the Rohingya to the camp, And I wanted to explain the situation, why this crisis took place, why we had these refugees and these stories, because I thought that we could understand the roots of the problem. If we did, we could avoid it happening again. So this was my intent, and I arrived with a small team, a camera person and myself, and we didn't have really any funding in the beginning. So we just got a plane ticket, and we had the idea to go to the children first and collect what they had to say, but seen from a point of view, an innocent point of view, children's point of view. So it took us a few days to obtain the authorizations and clearances. It's very difficult in the camp. And once you're there, we, of course, through the schools, because there were schools organized quickly, so we went to meet the families and talk with the children and explain what our project was, and to see their reactions and begin to interview children. Almost at the last day of the interview work that were filmed, several hours of interviews, the interpreter came to see me, and she was a bit upset, and she said, "Oh, there's a 9-year-old girl who would like to testify, but she wants to talk about something that is very delicate, very complicated, the rape that she was submitted to. She was raped." So I said, "Okay, of course." So she gave me an appointment for the next day, and in fact there were 10 women, so no longer children, but when they knew that I was going to interview and film this testimony, women had this need to come forward, and they were there waiting for me to record their words. So this is why I talked about serendipity. I hadn't come to precisely collect these testimonies, but I was able to record more than the 4 that we see in the film, but we have to cut a lot of film during the editing process. I still had my idea of a 52-minute film on geopolitical issues there, but 3 years later, Arte launched a call for projects on short films, documentary films made by women film directors, and I had in mind all these testimonies of these women that I had collected, women raped, but as a weapon of war. And I watched everything again, all these testimonies. It seemed simple, but since they are speaking Rohingya, I had to find a Rohingya interpreter in French and a translator, and this is very complicated. On location, I had someone translating from Rohingya to Bangla and then into English and then French. So I did the opposite way. I tried to find a more direct route, so to speak. And very quickly, we managed to make this 10-minute film, which gives the floor to these women. And this is a topic that we do not hear very much, even in documentary films, and this is essential, as it will be confirmed by Olga. You told Olga Prudhomme before we came into this room that we need to make a longer film. We need to speak about this. We are in Caen, an afternoon, it's the afternoon, and we think it's easy to collect these testimonies, but these are genocides, these are war crimes, and often these crimes kill people, so it kills the speech, and it's difficult to collect these. So maybe I'll come back to what Olga said, and I worked on the question of Rohingyas since 2002. At the time, I was working on the elimination of discrimination that women face, and we talked about geopolitics, resources, China. But if there's one community that doesn't have a country, these are the Rohingyas. And you talked about Myanmar and Burma previously. There are hundreds of ethnical groups. Those who are persecuted are the Rohingyas. And this has been since 1982. There's a law which was voted to remove the nationalities to those who had it, the Burmese nationality. So the Rohingyas in Bangladesh and elsewhere have no nationality. They are stateless, and they have always been persecuted. And I remember in 2002 when we looked at the question, and the question of Myanmar was re-examined, or Bangladesh. There's only one river separating both, the Naf River, and this is where, in 2017, on the August 25th, 2017, the exodus took place. More than 700,000 people crossed the river, and they arrived in Bangladesh. I'm very moved when I watched this documentary film, and I must congratulate Olga. And this is a film that you see 6 years after that the army launched this campaign, this massacre, and of rapes and criminal fires in the region. It was a specific region, the north of the Rakhine state, and this is what triggered and provoked the exodus of these people.
On 3 occasions, I went to some places and to Myanmar. Cox's Bazar, please, maybe. Cox's Bazar is where you have the 6 main refugee camps in Bangladesh, really at the border with Burma, Myanmar. And you have 6 refugee camps in that region, in that perimeter of 13 square kilometers. Kutupalong is the largest of all, so I visited those camps, the 6 camps, on 3 occasions. Then I also went to Myanmar in 2018 and 2019. And today, the situation is even worse than before. So I want to pay tribute to this work that has been done, to this documentary, even though it's been 6 years now since the exodus, and the situation has actually got worse, which is not normally the case. Normally, with time, you manage to find solutions, sustainable solutions for refugees to not stay in those camps forever. But for those refugees, actually, I must say that they don't even have the status of a refugee. Bangladesh has refused to treat them as refugees. Refugees do have rights according to different conventions for refugees, but they're there without any of those rights. And in 2017, I'm talking about the exodus. There were several waves of Rohingyas leaving and going to Bangladesh for asylum, but I'm going to focus on the exodus of 2017, following extreme violence, large-scale violence of 2017. After that time, there was some solidarity, some compassion that was shown, and that was very impressive from the Bangladesh people and from the community of Bangladesh. But as of today, it's really the population of Bangladesh asking for the Rohingyas to go back home. So maybe you know this. Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's very difficult even for them. They are on lands which are in competition. So the inhabitants of Bangladesh want to exploit those resources of the lands where the Rohingyas are. And this is an area of the world that is the most threatened by climate change, with recurrent and terrible flooding. So it is indeed one of the countries that is the poorest on earth, which is why I'm talking about the welcome given to the Rohingya people, that the Bangladesh government opened up their borders. I remember I met the Prime Minister on several occasions. I met the Minister of of Defense, and there were on many occasions at the borders guards who were protecting the borders, and the Ministry of the Interior was telling me how he saw bodies floating on the rivers, and that's when he realized that there was a main exodus. They were used to seeing Rohingyas crossing the river, but he said that he saw a number of bodies floating on the river. He called the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said, "We are opening up the borders." And that's when the exodus, mass exodus, started. So that's a very poor country. So I went in 2017, when you were in Bangladesh, Mrs. Olga, I'm sure you probably saw many people from the international community coming and going. People were just lining, queuing, especially members of the royal family, celebrities. Many people went there to Bangladesh, to Cox's Bazar, to one of the camps to express their solidarity. Much money had been given to the Bangladesh government, but the situation today has completely changed. Everyone has forgotten the government of Bangladesh. Everyone has forgotten about the responsibility of the government. Everyone has forgotten about the Rohingyas. And even last week, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, before the UN, actually called on the international community to do something, and he said that there were elections coming, and that as of today, the Rohingyas have become a major burden for Bangladesh, for the country, for the people, and that the situation has gone worse and worse within the camps. As Olga mentioned it, one of the largest refugee camps in the world. There are gangs in those camps. There are traffickers, human trafficking, organs trafficking, drug trafficking. Just to come back to your question regarding sexual violence, the strategy of the army of Myanmar was actually to use rape, extreme violent rape. I've been to those camps. I've met women, young girls who have come from different villages, and the testimonies were the same. It was systematically violent, and that's why we are talking about crimes against humanity. We talk about genocide. And as the High Commissioner to the human rights said that this was a perfect example of ethnic cleansing. The men ran away when the army arrived. The men fled, believing that the women and the children, the young girls, would be protected. So the men just fled. And this is what happened in all the villages. They ran away, but very soon they realized that no one was going to be spared. So they started asking the women to leave their homes and to undress, to be naked on the ground. The young girls were raped inside the homes. Then they burnt the houses. There were very few young girls. I was among the first one to go there in October, and I remember the General Secretary from the UN asking me to see if I could meet the young girls, because it heard about some stories about the fact that the young girls had been raped and burnt alive in their homes. And the army had called on the heads of the villages to sign a document to say that they had burned the villages, otherwise we will rape the women. So they signed, and there is a document. I've seen those documents. They signed and approved of the burning of the village to spare the women, but despite that, they still raped the women, and the women tell you how they were tied to some rocks or to some trees, and people were raping them. There was mass raping on average by 6 or 15 soldiers each, but they were tied to rocks, and the babies were thrown and burnt alive. When I was in those camps, there was so much heat. It was very, very hot, and the women would keep their babies close to them. And I was wondering, you know, are you okay? The baby is close. And that's when they started crying and telling me story that those babies are miraculous, miracle babies that were saved, and how a year before, so that was August 2017, they were no longer allowed to sleep. The doors of the houses had to remain open, and if the army would see a baby, they would take the baby, they would throw the baby in the well of the village. The Burma army, yes. Tapmador. So they would take the babies, throw them in the wells. So water was contaminated, etc., etc. These are parts of the genocide, part of the elements that we got, how to get rid, to disseminate a whole people. And from the 25th, they would throw the babies in the fire. I met several women who said how they ran, how the babies were thrown, and they took back the babies, etc., etc. So it was so obvious the way they were protecting the babies. When I went back there in 2018, the official figures was 81,000 pregnancies, but it was underreported. Apparently, those young girls who were pregnant, they were not reported, so because of the taboo. So at the UN level, with the UNICEF and others, our main preoccupation was to find out what would happen to those babies, but they kept the babies. The community of the Rohingyas kept the babies because they were rare. Okay, what can the international community do? What can we do? Of course, we can testify, we can make films, but it's not easy. We sue to court, take these cases to court. Could you tell us, after having described what you just described, and that was terrible, terrifying, but could you tell us a bit more about what is happening, what will happen, what is a sign of hope in all this? It's not an easy one. I signed an agreement in 2017 of December. I went to Myanmar. I did not hear back from them. I asked for an authorization, so I went to the Council of Human Rights on December 2017, and then I went to this Security Council on December 12th. That's when I actually got the invitation. I had made a presentation of what I had heard, what I had seen, and that's when I got the invitation. So I left the Security Council and I went directly to the airport on December 13. I was there for the first time. I signed an agreement with the Myanmar government for justice and accountability for the whole community of the Rohingyas. They were ready to sign a document, but I can say that this document was not implemented, and it is very complicated. There's not been any act of justice so far, be it in Myanmar or in Bangladesh. Also, I signed a framework agreement of cooperation to support them, but right from the start, the government of Bangladesh did not want the Rohingyas to stay there for too long. They did not know they would stay that long. So I did sign an agreement for all the holistic services. We were able to work with them to bring some holistic services, but still they refused to work on women empowerment. They would not allow us to work on education of children. These are spaces that have been developed by the UNICEF for the children, where children can come maybe for an hour to draw something. The UN and the humanitarian agencies have not been able to teach in the language of Bangladesh or in English or in another language. It has to be Rohingya. So there are many, many restrictions that have been imposed by the government of Bangladesh, and they keep on increasing those restrictions. Myanmar has not ratified the status of refugees or the convention of the Rohingyas. Maybe we should remind you, this is just some revision for those who might not know. So what is the status? This is part of the international justice to qualify the status of ROM or OM is a right, a humanitarian international law or right that states the various crimes, war crimes, genocides, and crimes against humanity. So this is a particular status called ROM or Roma. Okay, so even if a country has not ratified the status, the Roma status, since you have China, which is a permanent member of the Security Council at the UN, always supported by Russia, so there's always been a veto regarding the International Court of Justice. So there's not been any appeals, any recourse to the International Court of Justice. So what happened in 2019 is that Gambia in Africa, which placed a case to the International Court of Justice, went to court in The Hague on behalf of the 57 Muslim countries and the Organization of the Islamic Countries, made up of 57 countries, went to court regarding genocide against the Rohingyas. So the case was heard in 2022 by the International Court of Justice, ICJ. This was a preliminary act at first, and it was receivable from a legal point of view. The argument of Myanmar, and it was pleaded by the government of Myanmar at the time. Now she is in prison by the military junta. Okay, maybe I should just say that she had won the Nobel Prize, yes, for peace, for resisting the junta in Burma at the time that she was in power. She was not even saying the word Rohingya. She was saying it was good to do it, but a number of distinctions were removed from her. Not only she did not want to pronounce the name of the Rohingyas or the word Rohingyas, and even the relationship with international community was very negative. I met with her in 2018 for 1 hour, and we were going to talk of this issue, of course, of the Rohingyas, and I was almost within walking distance of the presidency, and I received a message to say that it was going to be a courtesy visit rather than a substantial discussion. And we spoke for an hour, but about the weather, about my roots, my Indian roots, my clothes. Every time I was trying to talk about the Rohingyas and the situation of women. And she said, well, you will have a meeting with such and such minister. So she refused to talk about this. So at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that she's the one who pleaded for the Tat Madov regarding the jurisdictions, or to say, I don't have the words in French, but that Gambia had no standing or no personal or no legitimacy, if you like, to plead for this case. But on July 2022, the court rendered its final conclusions to say that this genocide crime did not apply. This is a humanitarian law on behalf of all of humanity. So the ICJ just took hold of this case. Now Gambia will be called to come to court to prove the genocide. And I'm sure it's not going to be that difficult. We do have reports, Triple IM, which is a mechanism like an inquiry or investigation team that continues to work on this issue to document all these human rights violations. So there are those reports, but also more recently, the U.S. with Blinken, under his auspices, his team has been working on this topic. They did a great job and did a legal analysis to prove this genocide. So Gambia will probably rely on the UN report and on the US report as well. And probably there will be other states that will join to give a hand on the issue of sexual violence. I'm sure I will be called to bring some pieces of evidence and elements to prove the systematic sexual violence against the women and the girls.
So this is a crime against humanity. It's the question of repeating these actions, and the International Court of The Hague is going to take hold of this. But often I'm not an international lawyer, but there are mechanisms. There were some for Rwanda, namely, and there are specific genocides and crimes against humanity, war crimes, and they can judge these crimes. These specific situations are special, not as the court for the ex-Yugoslavia, etc. Otherwise, it's the International Court of The Hague. But if you read the papers, if you look for information, I don't know if you read many, this is mentioned often when you see trials today for facts committed in Rwanda 25 years ago. It is because all these mechanisms, despite the time that goes by, because they weren't judged at the time they happened, we can hope that one day justice will be made. And it is important for the victims. Olga? Yes, it is extremely important. If this didn't exist, it would be awful. Yes, we need to hang on to the idea that even if it's 20 years later or more, their justice will be made, and no reason for things to stop before. This is why sometimes in what you said, Pramila, there are, it's like a class, a law, a legal class, in fact. These elements are very important. Did you want to add anything? No. Maybe, well, you will also, in the room, have time to ask questions. So what I wanted to add is that what you saw in the documentary film is the fact, well, now the situation has worsened, and now the population is still living in these temporary shelters, and so there's a makeshift. And the High Commissioner for Refugees, we contact them. We also always try to consolidate the refugee camps, strengthen them, and there is a systematic refusal of the government to do so. So these are temporary shacks, and they're made of inflammable material. And recently there was a fire, a deadly fire that left hundreds of people without shelter. There's a cyclone as well, and there were many victims. And as Emmanuel said, Bangladesh is a country submitted to natural disasters, and these refugees are faced with floods, landslide, and others. And I'd like to say that we need to think about these children. I have met these children, and I can tell you that they are, I've met many. I travel along countries where there's conflict, but the Rohingya people are the most marginalized in the world. And they're really confronted to a dark future. Very little freedom of movement, almost no access to education. They're faced with poverty, no protection, faced with abuse, and as you saw, there's still forced marriage. Children are wedded at a very early age. And when I went to the camps, there were women telling me that at night, people came and took away the children and the young girls. They were kidnapped, and this population of Rohingyas are like prisoners in their own camp. So they cannot report in the case of a kidnapping. And the boys told us about organ trafficking as well. So there are many different gangs. There's drugs trafficking, terrorism. For Bangladesh, it's a disaster. It's a huge burden. And you can go on YouTube and listen to the speech given by the Prime Minister. So Sophie Landrin published a month an article saying that at 4 in the afternoon, NGOs and organizations that are enabled to intervene can no longer after 4. I think in the far west there were more laws than there. When I went there, it was at 5 a.m. So they don't necessarily have facilities or toilets, so it's extremely difficult. So now it seems that there's no longer any hope for these Rohingyas. There are a lot of crimes taking place there. I think there were more than 50,000 crimes from January to June. It's a complete despair there. It's a state of lawlessness, and people depend on humanitarian aid for their basic needs. And before the government in Bangladesh received money, with their money, they gave 1 meal a day for everyone, for children as well. And I remember it was a good meal in terms of quantities. It was a bag of rice, but now they no longer have any money. And even the World Food Program has been submitted to a lack of financing. And this year, they were confronted to a lack of finance, and they had to make difficult choices to have access to food until the end of the year, and have these bonds for food were reduced to $12 per person, and now $10 per person, again to $8 per person each month, which means 27 cents per day, per meal. So $10 you can convert into euros. I think it's about the same, or 8 euros for 1 month. So it means less than, I think the dollar is less of a value than euros, so 9 euros maybe, or for a meal and per person. So this is really low. I wanted you to bring hope. I don't know if you have managed or succeeded to do so. But do we have any questions in the room? Any comments? Please go ahead. I think there are some microphones that can be passed around the room. Please wait for the microphone to speak. My question is, well, in the camps, where are the Rohingyas? They're not safe in the camps, right? You said they're faced with rape and other crimes. You're talking about today? Yes. Yes. There is a security issue within the camp, the different camps, and especially for human trafficking, trafficking of young girls, but also trafficking of organs concerning the boys. I do not see that there are many rapes in the camps. There were rapes by the army, the Tatmadaw army, Burmese army, but it is a community that is very conservative, the Rohingyas, and women and young girls are limited in terms of freedom of their movement, and you see young boys playing football, whereas girls stay inside. They stay inside their shelter, their little house. And what happens as a coping mechanism, in fact, girls are given to be wedded very early. So there's prostitution, but I don't think there's much rape within the camps. So may I ask a second question? Yes, go ahead. So Myanmar is led by militaries. Yes, there was a coup in 2021. Behind you and then in front of you, we have a person. Hello. You said that 1 million refugees were in the camps. I'd like to know about the total population of Rohingyas and whether they had declined since the genocide, and do you have any figures? No, unfortunately, I do not have any precise figures, but what I can say is that the Bangladesh government have 1.2 million people. Now there's a generation of Rohingyas who have integrated the communities of Bangladesh. But those who arrived starting in 2017 are still kept in the camps. Even the percentage of Rohingyas, because there is a community of Rohingyas that is minimal and that still lives in Myanmar, it is still persecuted and things are worsening. This is what explains the fact that, well, I must add that the government of Bangladesh continues to negotiate directly with the junta, the military junta, to bring back the Rohingyas to Myanmar. So there's a big issue because the United Nations, we are insisting for these people being sent back to their countries being done in safety, full safety, and that it is under a decision to be volunteer. And that wasn't necessarily, for some it wasn't necessarily relevant to repatriate them. So the EU saying you're placing the threshold very high by asking for return to the country, be safe, voluntary, and dignified. And so the government in Bangladesh negotiates directly with the military junta, but the Rohingyas refuse to leave Bangladesh. Therefore, there were a few trials, but people refuse. The Rohingyas do not want to leave because now they very well know about what is happening in Myanmar, and they know the military situation, the civilian government is in jail, etc., and as Aung San Suu Kyi. So nobody wants to leave Bangladesh. And I don't know if you have read, there's something called Bastan Chahar. This is an island where the international community had given instructions to Bangladesh not to build anything on Bhasan Char, but the Bangladesh government decided to do things anyway, and they built shelters for the Rohingyas there. And today there are 100,000 Rohingyas on this island, which is cut off from the rest of the world. They do not have any appropriate services. The United Nations are not present there. And I think it takes 10 hours by boat to reach the island. So there are no NGOs there, no humanitarian organizations, and their situation is critical. Yes, indeed. There are still a few Rohingyas in Myanmar, but they are slaves. And the great majority of the community is either dead or has fled. I think 80% is represented. So thousands of refugees left in 2017, but they joined a community of 250,000. This is why we talk about 1 million now. But in an ideal world, one day the Rohingyas could or should go back to their land. But as one of the women testifying, as long as Myanmar will not recognize them as nationals, as having the Burmese nationality, they do not want to come back because death awaits them in Myanmar. So we are talking about refugee camps. These refugees, there are refugees we welcome in France. We try to help them to be part of the society, but they are jailed there in Bangladesh. 1 million people in such a small place, such a small land. They cannot even grow food to feed themselves. So they're living only thanks to humanitarian help, and they cannot buy anything. It is a dreadful situation. They cannot produce anything. Thus, they cannot do anything. They have no status, as you said. In France, you have a refugee status. You can obtain it, and I think you both said it, but not only they are stateless, but it is the greatest stateless community in the world. The greatest community. It is the most persecuted population. And for women, it is even worse. Because, for example, at the United Nations, we had decided to give allocation to a subsidy to the Rohingya women. And those who managed, they're called Maji. It's always the men who are responsible of the management of the camps. They decided that women shouldn't work, and therefore they impose certain restrictions. There are some restrictions that come from the top of government, the government in Bangladesh, but also other restrictions from the camp. It is radicalizing. They are speaking about a terrorist camp now. That is how they describe the camp. And imagine all these children. I have children. There's a space created by UNICEF for children to be able to draw. They were given pens and crayons, and what they drew were machetes, weapons. It was very violent. All their drawings. We saw what they were drawing were planes attacking them, and there's of course radicalization that is visible. We have a question. Please raise your hand so we can see you. Hello. I think you've already answered to my question. It was why, being aware of the violence there, why aren't they sent or repatriated to other countries? in other countries, well, the closer country is Myanmar, and other countries, well, Bangladesh has opened its borders in 2017, and the last time I traveled to Bangladesh in the camps, that was in 2019. There were still people arriving. It wasn't an exodus, but people still arrived, and the High Commissioner for Refugees was still receiving people there. The borders are remaining open to enter Bangladesh, but it is not true for other countries. Thailand, India have refused these people. And Bangladesh, although it doesn't recognize or acknowledge the Rohingyas as refugees with rights, at least they haven't refused them entering the country, whereas India has refused them under the pressure of China and other countries. Thailand has also refused their arrival, and there's no choice. Under your control, I would like to say that 2.5 years with Ukraine, we saw what happened in Europe. Certain countries opened their doors, others closed. It's part of this is what Bangladesh did in the beginning, but in fact, these are exceptions in history, a humanitarian gesture that we hope we would see more often, but normally there are borders. These are the standards there, and no one can cross the borders without having been invited. This is a standard. This is a global standard. Hopefully, there are exceptions, and this is why there's a status. You can have the refugee status in a number of countries. This is true in France. You can, by proving that you are threatened in your country, it could be for political choices, your sexuality. You can obtain this refugee status and obtain protection. You are protected during the entire process. But you need to be able to come to the country. You need to design your file, and you have to face an administration also. And compared to other countries, it's different. I mean, things work well here compared to other countries. It is true. What they did in the beginning in Bangladesh was remarkable. What they did, they respected the principle not to refuse anyone, but it's by humanity. They didn't repress or backflow the people. They are asking for Rohingyas to go back to their countries. They're asking the international community for help. But in the beginning, they received financing from the international community, but today there are no longer any resources. The Rohingyas are still there, but nobody speaks about it. I'm going to give the floor to Exelat, who took the floor during the introduction. We have the feeling that the international community is less and less able to solve conflicts, whether because they're under pressure or other, but the refugee camps, which are supposed to be transitory spaces, are becoming sustainable ones, long-lasting ones. You are absolutely right. If you go to Sudan or Darfur, I was in Darfur, and I met people who live in these refugee camps and have been living there for more than 2 decades. And now with the war that started again on April 15th, Darfur is once again the theater of these genocides and everything we have known 2 decades ago. Recently, I was in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. In June, I was in southern Sudan 3 weeks ago and at the borders with Sudan, and I noticed that there is food insecurity that is unbelievable. Immediately, I called Cindy McCain, who now is the executive director of the PAM, the Food World Program, and we discussed of Bangladesh, where there were 2 deficits, thus to be able to feed people until the end of the year, at least a soup and a meal. It is awful. And the same thing, I went in Colombia in May. It's my 7th year as special representative of the General Secretariat, and it's the first time that I see so many people coming to tell me that they are dying of hunger. I saw this in Colombia. I was in Cartagena. I was in Bogota, and a lady came to me. I was with the President Petro, and she said, I want to talk to the president and to tell him we are dying of hunger, that violence have not ceased. And since the agreement, the peace agreement in 2016, the situation has worsened. And it is still the same thing. And in Bangladesh, it is awful.
Bonjour.
Has Burma been sanctioned by the UN because of the genocide? That's what I was talking about. Myanmar has not approved of the Roma status, so the International Court of Justice has not been able to directly take this to court or go to court to carry out investigations. So there is a responsibility for the Security Council to refer this case back to the International Court of Justice, but it has not been the case because China, that has some interest in this, has vetoed this decision, supported by Russia. So there was one initiative from Gambia, as I explained. So we will have to wait many years. Unfortunately, justice takes a lot of time, but we are on the right track. A preliminary decision has been made regarding the competence, and now the case will be heard. Personally, I'm rather optimistic. Coming back to your question, I want to end on an optimistic and hopeful note. However, now for the last maybe 10, 12 years, France has changed its laws to give the possibility to file a complaint for genocide, war crimes against any representatives who might be on the French territory, even though they may not have committed the crimes in France. So if a Burma crime or murder is in France, according to French law, if the investigation would prove their implication, but as of today, we do have this possibility in the name of humanity, of something that is beyond ourselves, our limits. So it may seem very small at the moment, but still there are people being taken to court thanks to those apparatus, because they may be sentenced to life, and sometimes it does work. This is what we call the universal jurisdiction or universal competence, universal jurisdictions. Okay. In the case of ISIS, the Islamic State, yes, ISIS did in Iraq. Many cases were judged here in France or in Germany. But there are also sanctions against individual members of the army, of the Tatmadaw, of the Burmese army. Sanctions either in the form asset seize, when the goods are seized, or travel bans. So these people are not allowed, for example, to travel in certain countries. So there are several countries that have issued sanctioned, freeze, seize. These are tools and ways to ban some people from traveling to some countries. Okay, let's hear the young people, and then we'll have the parents talking. Let's hear the young people first. So I have a question regarding the young women and the young girls that you interviewed. In the documentary, we see some form of resilience, but how come? Because their life is so hard. How come they are so resilient, especially the one maybe at the end of the documentary who is saying, I have no hatred. And you have the camera on this young girl. I was looking in her eyes, in her mouth, something that would show that, of course, I can't stand them, I hate them, but yet her face was without any hatred. Yeah, I think we should ask her the question. I was too very surprised, and I continue to admire them for this strength, this courage that they have. I was surprised not only that they accept, I wasn't even asking them to testify. They came to me. They had a need to talk. And maybe they want to use the camera that I represented to say that at least what they were sharing could be heard and seen outside of my own circle. I can't answer this really, but yes, it does testify of a great dignity, of great courage. This is very subjective, but I think personally that the little time I had with them, but also with the Bangladesh people, the time that I had with them, I came across the same dignity and the same courage. It's something that I always notice every time I go there, and I've been going there for many years, and I'm always amazed by that. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, though. Another comment, I saw you nodding. Yes, regarding the universal jurisdiction or the universal competence of the courts, I think it's been a long-term battle. I think as France is concerned, there was a time of step back. I think probably about 2 or 3 years ago, crime that were not recognized as such in some countries, for example, in the case of Syria, where genocide was not part of the recognized crimes. I think there was someone from Syria. It was actually judged by the Cassation Court, and they lost the case. So, okay, fine, fair enough. Maybe we can talk about this afterwards. Yeah, this is rather technical, but yes, law was not applicable because in order to blame someone of a war crime, it had to be that the same crime existed in the concerned country. But of course, that made no sense. It made no sense. It took away the whole meaning of the universal jurisdiction. I think last September it was reported, and this person from Syria was proved wrong. But indeed, it's something that is still fragile as a system, and that needs to be reinforced in order to live. I think in a few weeks' time there will be a book release that's called Crimes Against Humanity, and it's a testimony of a magistrate that will be released, I think, at the end of October. This is a scoop for you. We have another 5-10 minutes. We still have time to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions. We have some teachers, I guess, here with us. Where are you? Yes? Do you talk about this in your school curriculum? Or maybe you're not. Are you a history teacher? We are talking about Rwanda, but we come across these topics. We are going to talk about China and the Uyghurs. So these are similar topics, not the Rohingyas as such, though. But yes, for their oral exam in June, these are the kind of topics that they can address, but it's not actually part of the program as such. I was just asking. I wasn't aware. So I'm just asking those who know, the teachers. Okay, thanks. Thanks for your comment.
Okay. En un mot, c'est la fin de cette rencontre, l'une comme l'autre.
In a nutshell, when you knew you were going to be speaking to a group of students, you said great, and yes, of course it is great, because we must be aware of all these issues as soon as possible to be able to think about it, to work on it. especially when it comes to sexual violence. It's been a taboo for so long. Even in France, issues of incest and sexual violence is something that we've only just recently started to talk about. So we must open up the way for discussion, for people to speak, and it's wonderful to do this with you, through books, through documentaries, through forums, and we need to have young people listening and discussing and asking questions to become fully aware of what's going on. These are issues that concern all of us. We are all world citizens. I'm just wondering if some of you might be thinking of doing things in the future and working on those issues in the future, of working on issues of refugees, or maybe you're too young to think about this, or maybe some of you already are thinking about that, these kinds of who would like to become a special representative for the UN? Please raise your hands. We'd be happy to see you. Okay, anyone? Yeah, we have a few. Okay, one last word from you. I just wanted to say that it takes time for justice to do its work, and I want to remain optimistic. In 2009, September 28th, there was a huge massacre in Guinea-Conakry in a stadium that was orchestrated by the transition president, who was not supposed to run for office, but he wanted to do it. And there were 26 different political parties that had organized a large demonstration, and he gave instructions to the army to shoot people, to rape the women, to rape the young girls. This was a pacific or peaceful gathering, so many people were killed, many girls were raped. This was during daylight in a stadium. And 2 or 3 weeks later, I was appointed by the General Secretary as a commissionary. So I was a member of this special commission in 2009. So women, girls were raped during that event. And I submitted my report to the General Secretary in December of 2009. And my position was actually created just after that. On September the 30th, a resolution was voted. My position was created in January 2010, and I was there in 2017. We worked with the Guinean authorities. The so-called president at the time had been arrested with a number of his ministers. They were all involved in that terrible massacre. And since 2017, I'm wearing a different hat. I've been working with Guinean authorities to give justice to the victims. But there was a coup in 2021. In 2021, there was a coup in Guinea. And the military junta and the head said that in September of 2021 they would organize the trial within a year. But last year, on September 28th, just day per day, 13 years later, the case was taken to court, and the former president and several ministers were judged by the court and accused of war crime and crimes against humanity. And I was there myself with the General Secretary of the International Court of Justice. It took 13 years. This trial is still ongoing, so I remain confident regarding the Rohingyas. Thank you all for your attention. Let's thank and congratulate our two speakers, Alex for organizing this debate. Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.